When it comes to COVID-19 curbs, Singaporeans are least willing to put up with measures that affect their social life. As infections rise, people here are much more concerned about catching the virus now compared with last year. And tributes have been paid to DJ and musician Chris Ho, who died of stomach cancer. You're watching The Big Story. I'm Haryanto Diman. Subscribe to the Straits Times channel so you never miss a single episode. With the stabilization phase of tighter curbs in place from today, as expected, the CBD was less crowded, and trains along the north-south and downtown lines were missing their usual throngs of morning commuters. At lunchtime, my colleagues observed relatively low foot traffic at the Chinatown station, as well as in nearby areas like Chinatown Point. A similar situation in Orchard, few people seen at the usually packed tunnel connecting Wisma Atria and Ngee Ann City. And not much of a lunch crowd either at the food court at 313 at Somerset. In the wake of Pasir Panjang Wholesale Centre's 3-day closure, supermarket operators are assuring customers that there are enough fruits and vegetables in store and reminding them to only purchase what they need. Now, these were taken this morning at the Sheng Siong supermarket at Tanglin Halt. And the group said on Facebook last night that they are, quote, working hard to ensure that all our stores remain well stocked with timely deliveries of fresh vegetables and fruits. FairPrice also wrote that to cater to an anticipated rise in demand, it has increased the supply of fruits and vegetables to their stores across Singapore. Some 160,000 eligible Singaporeans will receive $100 worth of grocery vouchers next month, which will be delivered to their homes on Saturdays throughout the month starting from October 2nd. If there's no one home, there'll be a second delivery attempt over the following week between October 4th and 8th. Now, if you recall, these vouchers used to be put in letterboxes at HDB blocks, leading to white voucher thefts island-wide. Meanwhile, over 100 companies in the aviation sector will get an additional $130 million in wage support for the next 6 months. Those eligible will receive 30% support of the first $4,600 of gross monthly wages paid to each Singaporean or PR employee from October to December. Then from January to March next year, they will get 10% support of the same amount. A quick look at some clusters that the Health Ministry is closely monitoring. As at last night, one new case was added to the cluster at LearnJoy Education Centre, a tuition centre in Bedok, bringing its total number of cases to 17. 4 were added to the cluster at My Little Campus in Yishun, which now has 44 cases. 4 more cases were also detected in the cluster at Windsor Convalescent Home in Pasir Panjang. It has grown to 38 cases. As at yesterday, 1,203 patients are hospitalized, up by 61 from the day before. 172 of them need oxygen supplementation and another 30 are in critical condition in ICU. Of those who've fallen very ill, 168 are above 60 years old. An online survey done last week by the Straits Times found that people here are more concerned about getting COVID-19 as cases continue to climb. Nearly half of the 1,000 respondents said they've cut back on physical activities, while 73% dine out less often. And 72% fear catching the virus, compared with 37% from a similar survey conducted in August last year. Respondents were also asked about measures they are most willing to tolerate or live with. When it comes to mandatory mask wearing, 67% of them said they are most willing to put up with it. As for encouraging and/or enforcing work-from-home arrangements, 54% said they are most willing to live with it. Now, on the contrary, respondents are least willing to live with measures that affect their social life, with 50% least willing to put up with dining restrictions in groups of no more than 5. And as self-testing becomes more common, the survey found that people don't seem to be keen on this, with 45% saying they are least tolerable towards self-testing. To share more on the survey findings is senior political correspondent Grace Ho. Grace, what did ST hope to find out from this survey? How would the findings help?
Well, we wanted to find out how people here are feeling about the pandemic because it's been 1.5 years since it started. And there have been various surveys conducted since last year, including one in August last year. But since then, we've had restrictions loosening and tightening at so many points. We really wanted to find out how Singaporeans' lives have been affected financially, in terms of their physical and mental health. What are the sort of restrictions they're still willing to put up with, and for how long? And what trade-offs they're prepared to make if it means that everyone can be safer. For example, the survey has a question about how much longer they're willing to put up with dining restrictions, or how long are they willing to delay inpatient and outpatient treatment in hospitals.
About double the respondents fear getting COVID-19. What are they afraid of specifically, given the expectation is that in endemicity we will contract the disease at one point or another?
Yeah, so this doubling is relative to a survey done in August last year. The proportion of residents who feel concerned about number of new cases here has doubled to 70% compared to that survey. The proportion who fear catching the virus has also grown from 37% back then to 72% now. So, there's been this message of endemicity, which has been conveyed on multiple occasions. But I think these concerns come in the wake of a sharp spike in cases here, with the daily number rising to more than 1,000 over the past week. In these surveys, it's not just about clicking on specific responses, like whether you're worried or not worried. So it also asks the respondents to give qualitative comments. And quite a few of the words which came up were things like, phrases, like rising cases, many cases, to prevent spread, to stay safe. So I think the recent spike in cases was definitely something that weighed on people's minds.
The survey also found that people are least willing to live with measures that affect their social life, but most willing to put up with rules like mask wearing and working from home. What do those findings suggest to you when it comes to what people are willing to tolerate?
Well, people seem to generally accept that they have to wear masks when going out. But you can tell that, that the ones where they are least willing to tolerate or live with are things which really impact their social life in a visceral way, such as limits on the size of household gatherings. 54%, said that they're not really willing to tolerate with it. And dining in F&B establishments, that's about half. And curiously enough, self-testing as well, it's 45%. Well, on the other hand, you can say that, there's a significant proportion, 45%, willing to live with these restrictions for as long as necessary. But if you think about the remaining 55%, there is a time limit, to how long they're willing to put up with it. 36% are willing to live with it for another year, and 10% actually say they don't want to live with any more restrictions. So I think what it means is that while there is a high degree of trust, in the need for these steps, a high degree of trust in the government, but there could be some fatigue there, because clearly when it comes to activities which have a real impact on how people go about their lives, there's some unwillingness.
On that point, Grace, of confidence, 53% of respondents say the government has managed the crisis well or very well. Is this a surprise, considering that some measures imposed include ones that people are least willing to live with?
Well, I think the two things are not mutually exclusive. So on one hand, you have continuing measures which some people find less tolerable to live with. But on the other hand, clearly people have seemed to internalize the government's message that we must make a controlled exit from the pandemic, and these are the things we need to do. I think Singaporeans themselves have also internalized their personal responsibility for safe distancing and other measures. I think what's more interesting, though, is that, as I said earlier, the willingness to live with these measures is not an unqualified one. So let's say we have a survey a few months down the road. Will the proportions of people who are willing to stick with these measures change? Are people really sort of psychologically coming to grips with the reality that there could be multiple tapping of the brakes, so to speak? So, for example, on resumption of leisure travel, close to half of people actually say that, maybe I will go on holiday next year, but what if borders are still mostly closed and that doesn't happen? And then on hospital treatment, you see that 52% are willing to wait for outpatient non-urgent care. But then within that group, 50% are willing to wait, between 2 weeks and 3 months, but much fewer are willing to do so beyond 3 months. So I think very much depends on what happens next and how many more rounds of cycling, of tightening of measures people have to go through and their tolerance for that.
Thanks, Grace, for the inputs. That was senior political correspondent Grace Ho. You can read more on the survey at straitstimes.com. Tributes are being paid to DJ and singer Chris Ho, who died this morning after battling stomach cancer for the past 2 months. He was secretive about his age, but according to close friends, he was in his 60s.
Chris Ho's impact on the music scene in Singapore is threefold. First of all, he was a DJ. He was a radio DJ, and he played songs by Singapore artists on his many platforms, whether it's on Radio Fusion or on the other radio stations in Singapore. Secondly, he was an artist himself. He was a singer. He fronted his band called Zircon Lounge in the early 1980s. That heralded a new wave of alternative music here in Singapore. They were playing music that was cutting edge for its time. And thirdly, Chris Ho's impact was that he was a music journalist. He was a great writer. He had regular columns in the Straits Times and music magazine Big O, and he would write about Singapore artists, not just the mainstream pop ones, but also the underground acts, the indie rock bands, which not many people knew about. Personally, I learned a lot about music from Chris, whether it's reading his articles in the Straits Times, in Big O magazine, or listening to his radio stations. All in all, I think he was the guy who expanded a lot of people's musical knowledge. He brought forward things such as indie music and underground music to the forefront.
From mid-October, electronic signboards along Lorong Asu will light up when a bus is approaching to urge motorists using the left lane to move to the right. The trial for the virtual bus lane will last 3 months and hopefully encourage gracious behaviour on the roads. Overseas, Malaysia's Prime Minister Ismail Sabri Yaakob tabling the 12th Malaysia Plan today in what is the country's biggest 5-year development plan. The 400 billion ringgit plan aims to turn Malaysia into a high-income economy by 2025, eradicate abject poverty and increase the contribution of small businesses to the total economic output. It will have 9 main areas of focus, and key among them is putting the economy back on a growth trajectory following the negative impacts of Covid-19. And the Tony Awards are back, with Moulin Rouge the musical winning 10 trophies, including Best Musical and Best Actor. The show is a stage adaptation of the 2001 film of the same name about the famous Paris nightclub. Great to see the return of Broadway musicals after an 18-month shutdown during the pandemic. For more news and videos, visit straitstimes.com and remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel by hitting the red button below. Once again, I'm Haryanto Diman. See you tomorrow for more stories on A Big Story.